The dust of the Arizona Territory coated Ruby Mendoza's torn dress as she staggered behind the wagon, her wrists raw and bleeding from the iron shackles that bound her to the wooden frame. 3 days of dragging behind Malcolm Reeves's wagon had left her half dead, her once beautiful face streaked with tears and grime. The year was 1879, and justice for a Mexican woman accused of theft was nothing more than a death sentence delivered slowly and painfully. Ruby stumbled on a rock and fell to her knees, choking on the cloud of dust that engulfed her as the wagon continued its merciless pace. She had not stolen the silver watch that Reeves claimed she had. She had only been cleaning rooms at the hotel in Tucson when he had cornered her, his hands pawing at her body before she slapped him hard across the face. "Keep moving, thief," Reeves called back without slowing the horses. The 2 other men riding alongside him laughed, their voices carrying across the desert landscape. "Maybe another day in the sun will teach you to keep your dirty hands off what ain't yours." Ruby knew she would not survive another day of this. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her throat so dry she could hardly swallow. The world around her had begun to blur, the relentless sun beating down on her already sunburned skin. She had prayed the first night, begged the second, and now, on the 3rd day, she had accepted that death was coming for her. The sound of hoofbeats approaching from behind barely registered in her fading consciousness. A cloud of dust billowed up as a rider approached at full gallop. Ruby lifted her head slightly, squinting against the blinding sunlight. "Whoa there," a deep voice called out. The wagon lurched to a halt, nearly causing Ruby to collapse completely. Through the settling dust, she saw a tall man on horseback, his face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of a worn leather hat. "What business you got stopping us?" Reeves demanded, reaching for the rifle beside him. The stranger's horse sidestepped nervously as he raised a hand. "I was just wondering what crime warranted dragging a woman behind your wagon through the desert." "This ain't your concern, mister," one of Reeves's companions said, his hand hovering near his holster. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with barely a sound. Now that he was closer, Ruby could see his face tanned from years in the sun, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Name's Ethan Forrester," he said calmly, "and I believe it is my concern when I see a woman being tortured to death in the middle of nowhere." Reeves spat on the ground. "She's a thief. Stole my silver watch. Worth more than her worthless life." Ethan's eyes narrowed as he glanced at Ruby, taking in her condition. "That watch in your vest pocket?" Reeves instinctively touched his pocket where the chain of a watch was clearly visible. "What of it? Seems odd to drag a woman through the desert for stealing something you still have." The tension in the air thickened as Reeves's companions exchanged nervous glances. "She tried to steal it," Reeves amended, his tone defensive. "Caught her in the act." Ethan took another step forward. "I'll pay for her. Whatever you think she owes you." Reeves laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the desert. "She ain't for sale." $100, Ethan said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a small leather pouch. Ruby watched through half-closed eyes as Reeves's expression changed. Greed flickered across his face. 200, Reeves countered. 150, and I don't report you to the marshal in Tucson for attempted murder. Ethan's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath his words. After a long moment, Reeves nodded. "Deal." Ruby could hardly believe what was happening as Ethan counted out the money and handed it to Reeves. Her mind was foggy from dehydration and exhaustion. Reeves pocketed the money and gestured to one of his men. "Unchain her." The man fumbled with the keys before releasing Ruby from the shackles. Her legs gave way immediately, and she collapsed onto the hot sand. Ethan was beside her in an instant, his strong arms lifting her gently. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice softer than before. Reeves and his men watched with smirks on their faces. "Good luck with that one," Reeves called as he climbed back onto the wagon. "She's got a temper that'll get her killed someday." Ethan ignored him as he carried Ruby to his horse. She was lighter than she should have been, her body weakened from the ordeal. "You'll ride front seat now," he said quietly as he placed her carefully on his saddle before mounting behind her. Ruby's body was limp against his chest as he secured one arm around her waist. With his free hand, he reached for his canteen. "Small sips," he instructed, bringing it to her cracked lips. Too much at once will make you sick. The water was the sweetest thing Ruby had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but Ethan pulled it away after she had taken a few small sips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Save your strength," he replied. "The nearest town is still a day's ride from here." As Ethan guided his horse away from Reeves's wagon, Ruby felt consciousness slipping away. The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the solid warmth of the stranger's chest against her back. When Ruby awoke, the sun was setting, painting the desert in hues of orange and purple. She was lying on a bedroll beside a small fire, a blanket tucked carefully around her. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed the rescue, but then she saw Ethan kneeling nearby, stirring something in a small pot over the fire. "You're awake," he said, glancing up at her. "Good. You need to eat something." Ruby tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. Ethan was beside her instantly, helping her into a sitting position and offering her more water. "Why did you help me?" she asked after drinking. Ethan considered her question as he returned to the fire and spooned some beans into a tin plate. "No one deserves to die like that." He handed her the plate, and Ruby realized how desperately hungry she was. She tried to eat slowly, but her hands trembled with eagerness. "Reeves is known for causing trouble," Ethan continued. "I've heard stories about him in every town from here to Santa Fe." Ruby paused in her eating. "He lied. I did not steal from him." Ethan nodded. "I figured as much. Men like him don't need much reason to hurt others." They fell into silence as Ruby finished her meal. The night was growing colder, the desert heat dissipating rapidly with the setting sun. "Where are you taking me?" Ruby finally asked. "There's a settlement called Copper Springs about a day's ride from here. They have a doctor who can look at your wounds." Ruby looked down at her raw wrists and the bruises that covered her arms. "I have no money to pay a doctor, or to repay you for what you gave Reeves." "Don't worry about that now," Ethan said, taking her empty plate. "Just focus on getting your strength back." Ruby watched him as he cleaned up their small camp. In the firelight, she could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 30. His movements were efficient, practiced, as if he had spent many nights alone in the wilderness. "You're not from around here," she observed. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "What gave me away? You have not called me names. You have not told me to go back to Mexico." Ethan's smile faded. "I'm from Colorado originally. Came south looking for work after the mines started closing." "And did you find it?" "Work. Some. I do odd jobs, guide people through the territory when they need it. Been working as a scout for the army occasionally." Ruby nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted again. Her eyelids grew heavy as the warmth of the fire and the food in her stomach lulled her back toward sleep. "Rest," Ethan said, noticing her fatigue. "We'll head out at first light." Ruby wanted to thank him again, but sleep claimed her before she could form the words. The journey to Copper Springs took longer than Ethan had anticipated. Ruby's condition, though improving, slowed their progress. Her body was weak from the days of torture, and riding for too long caused her considerable pain. Ethan made frequent stops to let her rest, offering her water and the dried beef and hardtack from his saddlebags. During one such stop, as they sat beneath the sparse shade of a mesquite tree, Ruby finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "What will happen to me in Copper Springs?" Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "That depends on what you want to do. You could stay there if you find work, or move on to one of the bigger towns when you're well enough." Ruby pulled her knees to her chest, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. "I was working as a maid in Tucson. Before Reeves," Ethan finished for her. She nodded. "I cannot go back there. He has friends in Tucson. You have family somewhere?" Ruby shook her head. "My parents died when I was young. I have an aunt in Sonora, but she is very old. I left Mexico to find work, to send money back to her." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Copper Springs is a small place, but decent folk mostly. The saloon owner, Martha, might need help. I know her a little." Hope flickered briefly in Ruby's chest before doubt extinguished it. "Why would she hire me? I am a stranger. A Mexican stranger. Martha doesn't care much about where people come from, just how hard they work." Ethan stood up and offered her his hand. "We should keep moving if we want to reach town by nightfall." Ruby took his hand, noticing for the first time how gentle his touch was despite his calloused palm. As he helped her to her feet, their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding that neither acknowledged. They reached Copper Springs just as the last light was fading from the sky. The settlement was indeed small, a single street lined with wooden buildings, most of them dark now as night fell. A few oil lamps glowed in windows, and the saloon at the far end of the street hummed with activity. Ethan guided his horse directly to a small building with a sign that read, Dr. Samuel Wilson. He dismounted and helped Ruby down, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. The doctor, a balding man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, answered Ethan's knock promptly. His expression shifted from irritation to concern as he took in Ruby's condition. "Bring her inside," he said, stepping back from the door. "What happened?" As Ethan explained the situation, the doctor examined Ruby's wrists and the various cuts and bruises that covered her body. He cleaned her wounds with a solution that stung fiercely, then applied a soothing ointment before wrapping her wrists in clean bandages. "You're lucky," Dr. Wilson said as he finished. "No signs of infection, but you're severely dehydrated and malnourished. You need rest, plenty of water, and good food for at least a week." Ruby nodded, though she had no idea where she would stay for a week or how she would pay for food. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan spoke up. "Is Martha still running the saloon?" The doctor nodded. "She is, though she's been talking about selling it. Getting too old for the business, she says, but I suspect she'll run that place until they carry her out feet first. She might have a room Ruby could use for a few days. Maybe some work too." Dr. Wilson considered this. "Martha's always short-handed. Worth asking, certainly." After paying the doctor, Ethan led Ruby to the saloon. The noise hit them as soon as they pushed through the swinging doors. Laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses, and a somewhat out-of-tune piano in the corner. Several heads turned to look at them, curiosity evident in their gazes. A stout woman with gray-streaked black hair pulled into a severe bun approached them, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ethan Forrester," she said, her voice carrying easily over the noise. "Thought you'd be halfway to Santa Fe by now." Ethan smiled. "Change of plans, Martha. This is Ruby Mendoza. She's had some trouble and needs a place to stay for a few days." Martha's shrewd eyes assessed Ruby, taking in her torn dress and bandaged wrists. "Trouble has a name?" "Malcolm Reeves," Ethan replied. Martha's expression hardened. "That bastard. Come on back to my office. Both of you." She led them through the crowded saloon to a small room behind the bar. Once the door closed behind them, muffling the noise from the main room, Martha gestured for Ruby to sit in one of the chairs facing her desk. "Reeves did this to you?" she asked bluntly. Ruby nodded. He tried to force himself on me. When I fought back, he accused me of stealing and had me chained to his wagon. For 3 days, until Ethan stopped them." Martha's eyes flashed with anger. "I've heard stories about that man. Should have been hanged years ago." She turned to Ethan. "You did right bringing her here. I thought you might have a room she could use. Maybe some work when she's stronger." Martha considered this, her eyes still on Ruby. "I do need help, especially since Betsy left to get married last month. Can you serve drinks, girl? Clean rooms?" "Yes," Ruby said quickly. "I worked at the hotel in Tucson. I know how to clean, serve, cook." "I can't pay much," Martha warned. "Room, board, and $5 a week to start." It was more than Ruby had dared hope for. "That is very generous. Thank you." Martha nodded, apparently satisfied. "There's a small room upstairs at the end of the hall. It's yours for as long as you need it." She glanced at Ethan. "You staying too?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes meeting Ruby's briefly. "Just for tonight. I need to be in Santa Fe by the end of the month." Something that felt strangely like disappointment settled in Ruby's chest. Of course he was leaving. She had known that their paths would part once he had delivered her safely to town. "You can have your usual room then," Martha said, standing up. "I'll show Ruby upstairs." As Martha led her from the office, Ruby turned back to Ethan. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." He nodded, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Get some rest." The room Martha showed her to was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the quiet street below. After Martha left, Ruby sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. She was safe now, with the promise of work and a roof over her head. She should have felt nothing but relief and gratitude. Yet as she lay down on the first real bed she had slept in for days, she found herself thinking of Ethan, of his kind eyes and gentle hands, of the way he had risked his own safety to save a stranger, and of the fact that by tomorrow night, he would be gone from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay on the bed in his room, listening to the gradually quieting sounds of the saloon below as the night wore on. His thoughts kept returning to Ruby, to the courage she had shown despite her ordeal, to the quiet dignity in her voice when she spoke of her past. He had not planned to stay in Copper Springs. The army was expecting him in Santa Fe, where he was to guide a survey party through the Northern Territories. It was good work that paid well, and he had given his word. Yet something about the thought of leaving Ruby behind troubled him. She was safe with Martha, he told himself. The people of Copper Springs were decent folk who would give her a fair chance. She didn't need him anymore. But what if Reeves came looking for her? The man was vindictive enough to track her down, especially if he felt humiliated by the way Ethan had forced him to release her. Martha's saloon might not be protection enough if Reeves brought his friends. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. One more day, he decided. He would stay one more day to make sure Ruby was settled. Then he would continue to Santa Fe as planned. His decision made, Ethan finally drifted off to sleep, only to be awakened a few hours later by the sound of shouting from the street below. He was out of bed instantly, grabbing his gun belt and moving to the window. In the gray light of dawn, he could see a small crowd gathering outside the saloon. At the center of the commotion were 3 men on horseback, Reeves and his companions. "Send her out," Reeves was shouting, his voice slurred with alcohol. "That Mexican thief. She's mine by rights." Ethan cursed under his breath, quickly pulling on his boots and shirt before heading into the hallway. He nearly collided with Ruby, who was standing outside her door, her face pale with fear. "Stay inside and lock your door," he told her. "Don't come out until I come for you." "Ethan, they will hurt you. I've dealt with worse than Malcolm Reeves," he assured her. "Now go inside." After making sure she had locked her door, Ethan hurried downstairs. Martha was already at the front door of the saloon, a shotgun in her hands. "Been a while since we had excitement this early," she remarked as Ethan joined her. "Told him to clear off, but he's too drunk to listen." "Let me talk to him," Ethan said. Martha looked skeptical but stepped aside. Ethan walked out onto the saloon's porch, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Reeves," he called. "Thought we had concluded our business." Reeves turned his horse toward the porch, his bloodshot eyes narrowing when he recognized Ethan. "Forrester, should have known you'd still be here. Where's the girl?" "Gone," Ethan lied smoothly. "Took the morning stage to Tucson." "You're lying," Reeves snarled. "Stage don't run through here." "Special arrangement," Ethan replied. "Either way, she's not here. And you're disturbing these good people's morning." By now, several other townspeople had emerged from nearby buildings, watching the confrontation with wary interest. Among them was a man wearing a sheriff's badge, his hand on his gun as he approached. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Just a misunderstanding, Sheriff," Ethan said before Reeves could speak. "These gentlemen were just leaving." The sheriff looked from Ethan to Reeves, clearly recognizing the latter. "Malcolm Reeves. Heard you were banned from Prescott last month for starting a brawl that destroyed half the saloon." Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "That was a misunderstanding, too." "Well, I suggest you misunderstand yourself right out of my town before I decide to investigate what brings you here in the first place." The sheriff's tone left no room for argument. For a moment, Reeves looked like he might challenge the order. His hand twitched toward his gun, but a quick glance around showed him that he was outnumbered. Not only were Ethan and the sheriff ready to draw, but Martha still had her shotgun pointed in his direction, and several townsmen had their hands near their weapons. "This ain't over, Forrester," Reeves spat before turning his horse. "I'll be seeing you again." "Looking forward to it," Ethan replied calmly. The 3 men rode out of town, dust billowing behind them as they urged their horses to a gallop. Only when they were well out of sight did Ethan allow himself to relax slightly. "Friend of yours?" the sheriff asked dryly. "Not exactly." Ethan explained the situation briefly, telling the sheriff about how he had found Ruby being dragged behind Reeves's wagon and had paid to free her. The sheriff shook his head in disgust. Reeves has been causing trouble throughout the territory. I'll send word to the marshals to keep an eye out for him." He glanced at the saloon. "The girl inside?" "Yes. She's going to be working for Martha." "Good. Martha runs a clean place. Girl will be safe here." The sheriff tipped his hat and walked away, the crowd dispersing now that the excitement was over. Ethan returned to the saloon, where Martha was already pouring coffee for the few early customers who had witnessed the confrontation. "That's going to be the talk of the town for weeks," she commented as she handed Ethan a cup. "You'd better go tell Ruby it's safe to come down." Ethan nodded, taking the stairs 2 at a time. When he knocked on Ruby's door, there was no immediate response. "Ruby? It's Ethan." "They're gone now." The lock clicked, and the door opened slowly. Ruby stood there, her face still pale but composed. "I heard everything," she said. "He will come back." "Maybe," Ethan admitted. "But not soon. The sheriff knows about him now, and Reeves isn't fool enough to ride back into a town where the law is expecting him." Ruby didn't look convinced. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and vulnerable. "I cannot stay here. I will put Martha and everyone else in danger." "You can't leave either," Ethan pointed out. "Where would you go?" Ruby had no answer for that. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her bandaged wrists. Ethan hesitated, then sat beside her. "Reeves is a coward. He preys on people he thinks can't fight back. Now that he knows the town will stand against him, he'll find easier targets. Until he decides I am worth the risk," Ruby said quietly. "Men like him do not forget." Ethan couldn't argue with that. Men like Reeves nursed their grudges, letting them fester into something dangerous. And Ruby was right that her presence in Copper Springs might eventually bring trouble to the town. An idea began to form in Ethan's mind. It was impulsive, perhaps even foolish, but the more he considered it, the more right it felt. "Come with me," he said. Ruby looked up, confusion evident in her dark eyes. "What?" "To Santa Fe. I'm guiding a survey party for the Army. They're mapping parts of the northern territories. It would mean traveling for several months, but you'd be far from Reeves, and you'd earn more than Martha can pay you. The Army would hire a Mexican woman. They're hiring me, and I need an assistant. Someone to help with the cooking, mending, that sort of thing." Ethan hadn't actually been authorized to hire anyone, but he was confident he could convince the survey leader of the necessity. It would be hard work, and not always comfortable, but you'd be safe. Ruby studied his face, as if searching for some hidden motive. "Why would you do this for me?" "You have already done more than anyone would expect." Ethan found he couldn't easily answer that question. Why was he so concerned about this woman's welfare? Why had the thought of leaving her behind troubled him so much? There was something about Ruby that drew him: her resilience, her dignity in the face of cruelty, the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive what would have killed many others. "Let's just say I don't like leaving jobs half done," he finally replied. "Getting you away from Reeves was only part of it. Making sure you stay safe is the rest." A small smile touched Ruby's lips. "Is that all it is? A job?" The question caught Ethan off guard. There was a perceptiveness in Ruby's eyes that made him feel as if she could see right through his casual explanation. "I don't know," he admitted. "I just know that I'd feel better if you came with me." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. "When would we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. I should speak with Martha first. I cannot just disappear after she offered me work." Ethan nodded. "Of course. She'll understand." As it turned out, Martha did understand. When Ruby explained the situation over breakfast, the older woman nodded thoughtfully. "Can't say I'm surprised," she said, glancing at Ethan. "Figured you wouldn't leave her behind, not with Reeves making threats." "I will repay you for your kindness," Ruby promised. "For the room, the food," Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. Just take care of yourself. And keep an eye on this one," she added, nodding toward Ethan. "He's too used to being on his own. Could use someone watching his back." They spent the day preparing for the journey. Ethan purchased supplies while Ruby helped Martha in the saloon as a way of thanking her. By evening, everything was ready for an early departure the next morning. As Ruby was folding the new clothes Martha had given her practical items suitable for travel, there was a knock at her door. Ethan stood there, holding a small package. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing it to her. "For the journey." Inside was a hunting knife in a leather sheath, small enough to be easily concealed but sharp enough to be effective. Just in case, Ethan explained. The territories can be dangerous. Ruby ran her finger along the wooden handle of the knife. No one had ever given her a weapon before, trusted her with the means to defend herself. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will learn to use it properly." "I'll teach you," Ethan promised. "Get some rest now. We leave at dawn." They departed Copper Springs just as the sun was beginning to light the eastern sky. Martha stood on the porch of the saloon, raising her hand in farewell as they rode past. The town was quiet, most of its inhabitants still asleep. Ruby sat in front of Ethan on his horse, just as she had when he had first rescued her. But this time, she was conscious, alert, her body stronger after several days of proper food and rest. She still felt the ache in her muscles from her ordeal, but the pain was fading, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. "It's a 5-day ride to Santa Fe," Ethan told her as they left the town behind. "We'll stop at a trading post near the territorial border to get you your own horse." Ruby nodded, trying not to focus too much on the solid warmth of Ethan's chest against her back, or the way his arm held her securely in the saddle. In the short time she had known him, she had come to trust this quiet man who had saved her life. But she was wary of examining her feelings too closely. Gratitude could easily be mistaken for something more, and she had no illusions about her position. She was still dependent on Ethan's goodwill, still vulnerable in this vast and often hostile territory. Yet as the miles passed and Copper Springs disappeared behind them, Ruby felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: hope. Whatever awaited her in Santa Fe and beyond, she was no longer alone. And for now, that was enough. What she couldn't know then, as they rode into the rising sun, was that the journey to Santa Fe would be just the beginning. In the months that followed, as they traveled with the survey party through the untamed northern territories, Ethan would teach her to ride, to shoot, to navigate by the stars. She would learn to read maps, to identify edible plants, to track game through the wilderness. And somewhere along the way, amid shared dangers and quiet evenings by campfires, they would discover that what had begun as rescue and gratitude had transformed into something deeper. Something neither of them had been looking for, but both had found in the vast, unforgiving beauty of the American frontier. But that was still in their future. For now, there was just the open road ahead, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, and the promise of a new beginning. Ruby Mendoza, once chained to a wagon and left to die, was now riding toward freedom and toward love she had not yet recognized but would soon discover.